Let's start with the fact that South Africa has just come out of hosting a successful World Cup. It created an opportunity to rebrand Africa, to reposition Africa. What we don't want is to lose the momentum of what that World Cup did in terms of placing Africa on the consciousness of the world. In your role as Deputy Minister of Arts and Culture, you're in a position strategically to take us forward. What are you doing?
Well, most definitely, because everybody agrees that the World Cup was the biggest success, but not only for us as South Africa, but the entire continent. You'll know that we brought a lot of artists from all over Africa. You know, all the clubs that were playing from Africa got lots of support from South Africans. We know what happens with Ghana during that time. There was a lot of support by South Africans. Our view is that that has given us a big step to move forward, to unite Africa, but also to say to all Africans, let's work together for Africa's development. Just beyond football, beyond arts and culture, we move into the areas of the economy where we can promote greater trade between African countries and encourage South Africans in particular, businesses in South Africa to move into Africa, and likewise those in other countries in Africa to come to South Africa to do business.
So many people who came to the World Cup were pleasantly surprised by the level of infrastructure, especially for transportation, the services that you found in the hospitality industry, and then of course the spirit of the people. But it's that infrastructure that we need to leverage in terms of attracting investment. From the World Cup and the gains, what can we do? Well,
I mean, we start from the basis that South Africa is the biggest economy in Africa with very advanced infrastructure. And we need to use that to attract more investment to the country. If you look at Gauteng itself, we always pride ourselves as the fourth biggest economy in Africa. So it's not surprising that people were surprised that we've got this kind of infrastructure. I think we need to continue to come up with these big new ideas, you know, like we are doing our freeways now. We came up with the Gauteng, and we are looking at positioning, particularly Gauteng, as a logistic hub, not only of Africa, but we think we can compete with the best in the world. We can compete with the Singapores, the Malaysias, in terms of how we coordinate trade, not only for South Africa, but for Africa in general.
Let's talk about positioning Gauteng, and in this regard I'd like you to put on your hat as the provincial chair of the ANC in Gauteng, and also draw on your experience as the former premier of the province. People say we need new ideas, new models for growth, because although we have the infrastructure, we're not operating at an optimum level in this country.
No, it's true. In fact, when I was still in Gauteng, we used to pride ourselves with what we call big ideas. And I think we should bring that back. We are planning to have an economic summit end of this month. And the idea is that we need to take a step back and say, in 1989, for instance, we realized that we couldn't rely on an economy that is focusing mainly on primary heavy industries, that you need to diversify to value-added manufacturing. We look at the automotive sector, we look at the financial sector, we look at business processing, outsourcing, and that's really what brought in what we normally, people know it as Blue IQ. But basically that was diversifying the Gauteng economy. I think we need to just take a step back and look at our growth and development strategy and say, what are the new big ideas? And I'm saying one of them is really to fast-track things like call centers. We need to look at beneficiations of mineral resources, jewelry industries, but also to ensure that we begin to build new cities. And one of them should be a logistic dry port, something of that nature that can begin to once again drive Gauteng to high levels of growth.
Depends whether you see the glass half empty or half full. But people are, even this government really, is really suggesting that economies of scale, industrialization is the way to go. And effectively that positions Gauteng within the basic mindset and ethos of what the government's trying to do in growing the economy and also creating jobs. The problem, though, is that generally exports have dropped by 20% for all of South Africa, and that's now being compounded by a strong rand, which is not making us competitive enough. So we've got a bit of a double whammy. How do we get around these double whammies?
It's a big challenge because exporters at the moment are very worried about the strong rand. On the other hand, consumers are a bit happy that things will become a bit cheaper for them. Now, we need to find a balance. Stable exchange rate, because it's good for long-term planning. And that's the reason why the government is going to be looking at the new growth path. It's begin to look at our fiscal and monetary policies and see how we can use this to drive growth, create employment, address problems of poverty, but at the same time continue to be able to attract foreign direct investment. Right. So it is quite a bit of a challenge, this debate around the strong rand, and therefore you need to find a middle road where you are saying, okay, our currency is stable, we have a stable exchange rate, we're able to attract investments in the country, we're not affecting too much of our exporters, and so on. So those debates are coming. I think we have a Lerato very soon as National Cabinet to look into the new growth path. Right. Because our concern, particularly when we're at the NGC of the ANC, is that we continue to see high levels of unemployment and the poverty gap between the rich and the poor is not narrowing, and therefore your economic policies must take that into account, and that's what we do.
I want to chip away at some of the things you've said. Before we talk about poverty alleviation strategies, you mentioned debates, and there are numerous debates currently underway, focusing still on exchange rate policy, the rand, making South Africa and Gauteng a competitive economy. There are calls for the Reserve Bank to intervene, either buy more dollars to support the rand or tax capital inflows. Many people see these as very short-sighted measures to deal with a crisis that's underway, but we're not thinking long-term, and we're not even thinking about productivity. People say that's the problem in South Africa, is that we're not productive enough, we're not producing enough in these export-led economies.
Well, there's a school of thought that we should intervene, particularly the Reserve Bank. Now, that view has not quite been accepted in the ANC and government. That's why it's a debate. My view is that we should learn from the past. I think we did burn our fingers in the past, where the Reserve Bank intervened and we lost serious dollars in the market. So we need to be careful how we intervene, but we need to ensure that on the one hand the economy does expand. And other people will argue, for instance, that if you have lower interest rates, that will help to generate growth, because in Europe and in the Americas, they are closer to 0% interest rates, and people think that's very good for the economy. So I think when we get to the debate at the end of this month in Cabinet on the new growth path, we will tighten up all these issues, particularly to ensure that the issues of prudence and fiscal discipline don't escape, but at the same time, you have to find ways in which the developmental state is seen to be intervening much more stronger in the economy.
Another debate is that of nationalisation, and we know the ANC is at pains to say it is not policy, it's a debate, and in a democracy we must debate. Yes. But it frightens off investors because they need clarity and certainty, and especially investors coming into Gauteng, because we're talking about nationalising mines, and we know this is the bedrock of this province's economy, and now there's new talk of nationalising the banks, and we know that the services and the financial services in particular are now the drivers of growth in this country.
Perhaps let's start where the NGC ended in Durban. The NGC said, we accept that in the discussion in the commission there was consensus around the issue of nationalisation, but we do need to do further research on this matter. I think we included words like study tours, etc. I think perhaps what I should emphasize is that South Africa is not moving away from its policy of mixed economy, market economy. So there is no debate around that.
Right.
There was no change of economic policy at the NGC. However, there was a lot of emphasis on greater state involvement in the economy to drive growth, create jobs, and fight poverty.
Okay.
And therefore, the issue of nationalization was looked at one of the options that could be considered when the state get involved, because the state may well decide that in a particular industry, including mining, it wants to own certain mines. That's why we agreed on a state mining company.
Okay.
However, in some areas, the state might decide it wants to partner with the private sector. And therefore, this debate should be treated carefully to ensure that all those options are looked at. So there's really nothing to fear. There's no change in economic policy.
All right, going to this issue of poverty, and you mentioned the fact that it's quite disconcerting to see the rich getting richer, the poor poorer, tackling those inequalities. And you see them in Gauteng.
Yeah, no, it's true.
The picture of wealth literally sits juxtaposed with the picture of poverty. Santon and Alexander, for instance. Going forward, as government tries to come up with jobs for the youth, safety nets for the poor, what could be done at a Gauteng level? Because in terms of urbanization, everybody's converging on Gauteng for hope, for restitution.
One of the things we decided to do in 2008, we agreed to set up a planning commission similar to the one that the national government has now set up. It's in the Premier's office. And the idea was that we need to begin to do long-term planning. We came up with what we call Vision 2055, which gives you almost a 40-year horizon of planning to look at which sectors of the economy has the potential for growth and creating jobs, looking at issues of resources, water, etc. Because we believe that if you want to create jobs, you can't just plan short-term. You need to look at long-term. So it's medium, short-term, medium to long-term. And therefore, in the Gauteng economy, we believe that your jobs are not just going to come from heavy industries. You do need to put a lot of infrastructure, for instance, to ensure that ICT thrives. That is a result of us deciding, for instance, to come up with what we call the G-Link project. Now, the G-Link project is really to increase the capacity of broadband. Because once you have that, you can attract a lot of companies to do call centers. In South Africa, you increase the capacity of your mobile companies. And also to ensure that as you move forward, you broaden the capacity of the ICT industry. So that project is currently underway, and value-added manufacturing is one way to go, automotive industries. But the economic summit is coming end of the month. Okay,
and finally, everybody says Johannesburg and Gauteng should position itself as the gateway into Africa. Don't reinvent the wheel. Use your competitive advantage in the services industry. Become the Hong Kong of Africa, the Singapore, the New Yorks. But we need to attract skills within financial services. We need our banks operating at maximum level, and we need more investments within the financial services sector. Were you to come up with a model to make this the gateway into Africa, what would you do?
Well, already Johannesburg is seen as the Africa's world-class city. So it is already a gateway. I think the issue is how do we strengthen that? For me, we must continue to have proper logistics, high-level logistics, roads, transport infrastructure. We shouldn't have potholes and traffic lights that are not working. We must have enough hotels, conferencing facilities. But one of the things that attract investors to an area is how quick they get assisted when they get there. And then one of the things I did when I was in MEC for Economic Development was to get institutions like JEDA, your Gauteng Economic Development Agents, to work with all the metros, the key cities, to ensure that investors have a one-stop shop. When they come and say, we want to invest in Johannesburg, in Gauteng, they can get to JEDA, get assisted with permits, get assisted if they want to acquire land, all these applications. Because sometimes investors are sent to too many centers, and they decide, well, maybe we should leave and go to Brazil or somebody else. So one-stop shop center to assist investors to come in. Right. And you know, we must show investors that we are very polite people, we are warm people, we want their investments. Because sometimes you find councillors and then other officials, they behave as if we don't want your investment here. The way we treat people, I think we must change our attitude. But certainly for me, Johannesburg is there, and the idea of Gauteng as a global competitive city region must be pursued.